Family, we are in a series asking and hopefully answering the question, why me? We have discussed that sometimes the answer to why me is that God may be punishing us. It could be that He is preparing us. Maybe He's protecting us. In our last discussion, we talked about He's perfecting or maturing us. Tonight, we want to continue in this series looking at Genesis chapter 32. I want to ask you to give very serious thought to the life lesson that Jacob learned that may be very well applicable to any of us, perhaps all of us. And that is the answer to why could very well be because of my personality, your personality. God has to deal with us not as a church as a whole, but sometimes He has to, in fact, most times, has to deal with us as individuals according to the personalities that we have. In Genesis chapter 32, starting in verse number 24, the Bible says, "And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. The hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob." This is an interesting scenario to consider. Not just a scenario, but a real pointed lesson for Jacob and a pointed lesson for us. The reason I say it's pointed for us is because we live in a culture that is obsessed with beauty, a culture that is obsessed with the outer person. We spend billions of dollars on skin care and surgeries and products and services. People want to enhance, or they want to reduce, or they want to improve something about their physical body. There are people who really believe life would be better if I was just taller, or if I was just lighter or darker, or if I had this physical feature, this enhancement, or if I was full here where I feel I'm too thin. Those things probably wouldn't change your life as much as you think they would. But what is interesting in this obsession about our outer bodies, it doesn't seem that people are obsessed about their personalities, in particular, improving their personalities. Life might not be better for you if you were taller or lighter or fuller, but it'd certainly be better if you had more love and peace and joy and those types of things, the fruit of the Spirit. When we look at Jacob, we see how God accomplishes His work in our lives by addressing our personality. What is interesting about Jacob is that God had promised in Genesis chapter 28 that He would bless the world through Jacob. The reason that's interesting is because when you look at the profile of Jacob, he was a con artist. He was a liar. He was a manipulator. He was a deceiver. He was a conspirator. And yet God is going to bless the world through him. Well, that tells me that God can work with any of us to accomplish His purpose. But I want you to notice how God worked to bless Jacob before Jacob became the means by which God blessed the world. In Genesis chapter 27, verses 18 and 19, there we discover that Jacob conspired with his mother to deceive his father and to steal his brother's birthright. When his father Isaac asked Jacob his name, he said, "My name is Esau." Daddy touched him and felt the physical differences in him. And he said, "Well, you sound like Jacob, but you feel like Esau." The deception worked, and Jacob deceived his dad and stole his brother's birthright. After he wrestles here in Genesis chapter 32, some accounts and some theologians discuss whether or not he wrestled with God himself or with an angel. The idea here is that this was a divinely ordained experience in Jacob's life. When he asked Jacob here, "What is your name?" he said, "Jacob." Remember last time he was asked, "What's your name?" he said, "Esau." When he gets through wrestling with God, he says, "My name is Jacob." Here are some things that we can conclude from this. Number one, you can't and shouldn't be someone else. Too many times people live their lives wishing they were someone else. You got to be who God made you to be. And that doesn't always happen until we go through things where we are, figuratively speaking, having to wrestle and having to experience moments of frustration. Number two, your struggle may be from God and not from Satan. Again, this was a God-sanctioned experience for Jacob. This is not like Job, who the devil chose to bother based on God having said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" This was a direct experience that Jacob had with God. Sometimes we think God's blessings are only by his provisions. Have you ever thought that sometimes God will bless you through aggravation and frustration? A third thing that we can learn from this is that you must learn how to face God so that he can deal with the real you. See, Jacob had been spending his life and his time trying to trick folk and be deceptive. You can become so busy trying to do those types of things that you don't deal with the real you. Number four, your blessings come when you come to yourself, your real self. How many of us are really being true to who we really are? Number five, sometimes you have to have hip problems. Somebody say, "Brother Gibbs, why do you say hip problems?" Well, I use that term figuratively because Jacob experienced his hip being struck in this wrestling experience. That was a physical reality. He left limping. You see, in wrestling, God allowed Jacob to think he was winning. And when God saw that Jacob had enough, he struck his hip and he left limping. Sometimes God has to strike our hips, so to speak, so that when we think we've won, he has to show us that he's really the winner. It's never about us. It's always about God's will, his way, and his word. So the next time you ask, "Why me?" maybe God's trying to work on your personality. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.